Chapter 15, Sticky Notes, is about freshwater resources. Make sure you read the case study about the Louisiana coast and sediments. It's one that is very popular to ask about on the AP test. So down here we have benefits of wetlands and benefits of sediments. So make sure that you read and study the benefits of wetlands. That is frequently on the AP test. And then sediments has been on there as well. So what happens is sediments flow down the Mississippi River through all the watershed of the Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico, and it actually builds wetlands. So sediments build wetlands on the coast, which protects the coast from hurricane and storm surge damage. It also provides habitat. So the sediments build these little sandbar islands, which is amazing habitat for many species. So there is a lot of benefits of sediments that you need to know. Some of the things that we've done to protect this area, and really a lot of the United States, including places in California, is we build levees that hold back rivers when they fill up from rain to prevent flooding. So we want to prevent property damage with flooding, but then we also prevent sediments from coming down, and we end up making kind of a worse problem. So make sure that you're reading all about this as well. All right, turning the page to page 390. So on 390, this figure and caption shows the watershed of Louisiana and of the Mississippi River. So all this area of our country drains into the Gulf of Mexico here through the Mississippi River. So this is the Mississippi River watershed. And we used to not divert it too much. So this area of land used to look like this, but because we're no longer letting sediments build, and they get washed away with waves and things, so they no longer build, but they continue to get washed away, and that is an important thing to understand. You need to understand the characteristics of a watershed. So we have watersheds in Santa Clarita. Our watershed feeds into the Santa Clara River and then eventually goes to the ocean. So watersheds, to understand a particular watershed, you have to understand the area of land that it covers, the length of the watershed, the slope, which is the angle. So think math and slope. So is it a steep slope or a gentle slope, which determines how fast things drain. So around here, our slopes are steep because we have steep-ish mountains that flow and feed into our river. The soil type, what type of soil? Is it sandy? Is it clay? What type of vegetation grows there, and how that watershed joins other watersheds. And so these are all characteristics that people who study watersheds, they study about a particular watershed. Up here, you need to know that there's a stat you need to know this statistic here, that fresh water is only about 2.5% of all water on Earth. So the oceans, which we cannot drink unless we do desalination, the oceans are almost the entire amount of water. And by the way, desalination is very expensive and it's not easy to do. So fresh water is only 2.5%, but look, of that 2.5%, almost 80% is stuck in ice caps and glaciers. And so really, we're left with less than 1% that we can actually use and drink of all water on Earth. So know that most of fresh water is stuck in ice caps and glaciers, and really of all the water in the world, only 1% or less is available for us to drink and use for farming. That's not very much. And so water is a precious resource. Going on to page 392, down here at the bottom, this figure and caption helps you maybe understand groundwater and aquifers a little. So an aquifer is a type of, it's an area of groundwater. So groundwater is anything underground, water underground, and then a particular aquifer is a section that groundwater fills up and stays. Sometimes it can bubble up into a spring. Watersheds are recharged in certain areas that we have to protect. Our riverbed is one of those recharge areas. So one of the reasons why we do river cleanups and we protect our river, even though it's dry most of the year and it has no surface water, it has all this water underneath, and whenever it rains, the water soaks down into our aquifers. And so it's very important to protect it from pollution. On 393, up here, know the Ogallala Aquifer. It's the largest aquifer in the whole world, and it covers Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, down into Texas, parts of New Mexico. So it's a funny name, Ogallala, but know that it's the largest aquifer in the world. Here's some terms to know. Runoff. A tributary is a creek that feeds into a river, or a stream that feeds into a river. So Bouquet Creek is a tributary of the Santa Clara River. So it flows into the Santa Clara River. San Francisquito Creek, Placerita Creek, all those creeks in Santa Clarita feed into the Santa Clara River. They're all tributaries. River system, know the definition of watershed, floodplain, and riparian. Riparian means having to do with a river, and it's an academic term that the AP test uses very often. So when they say a riparian ecosystem, think of a river or even a wetland ecosystem. Freshwater biomes like streams, rivers, ponds, and lakes are vital sources of our drinking water. And so we have to protect these freshwater biomes. All right, on the next page, 394, you have to know what a wetland is. So the definition of a wetland means it has saturated soil, so it's saturated with water. Standing water most of the time, not always, depends on maybe the tides or how much rain there's been in. So you can have wetlands on the shore, which we call estuaries. You can have wetlands inland, away from the shore. Wetlands also have special adapted plants and animals. And on the AP test, sometimes they use the word hydrology, which means water. So wetlands have their hydrology and their soil and their vegetation are three characteristics we study when we study a wetlands. Know the definition of a wetland, and these are other little terms that mean wetlands. So an older term is a swamp, a marsh, a bog. All of those are types of wetlands. This is super, super important. Understand ecosystem services of wetlands. Wetlands are extremely important, and the AP test loves to ask about wetlands. So make sure that you understand it provides habitat for migratory water birds. It also provides slowing runoff, reducing flooding, recharging aquifers, filtering pollutants. Super important things from wetlands. Turn to page 396. There are also threats to wetlands that the AP test asks about a lot. So we fill them in or drain them so we can build on top. So we call that development. We build roads and bridges, which can lead to air and water pollution in those wetlands. Invasive species can wreak havoc on a wetlands. We build dams which prevent water from filling up a wetlands. We overfish in the wetlands too, and pollution from agriculture, so your nitrates and phosphates that cause eutrophication, and then industrial pollutants too can get into a wetland area. Turn the page to page 399. Over here, you need to know what a sinkhole is. So when we overpump groundwater and it leaves kind of holes in our aquifers because we've overpumped it, it can create a sinkhole. It can also cause some buildings to sink a little bit. So in Mexico City, they're having a big problem with this. Turn to page 400. So this is an article about bottled water. Bottled water is not better than tap water in most circumstances. There is very little regulation. It's monitored by the FDA, which has less stringent requirements than the EPA does for tap water. So in other words, you can have more contaminants legally in bottled water than in tap water. It uses a huge amount of energy and fossil fuels to make the bottles. Even if you recycle them, it still requires a huge amount of energy to melt down that plastic and reform that plastic again. And the plastic can only be recycled and reused a few times before it's completely degraded. Or just not structurally sound, but the plastic still continues and then they just put it in a landfill. 60% of bottled water they tested contains endocrine disruptors because the plastic leaches into the water. And so bottled water is not great. What's better, and I see a lot of students doing this, is a metal hydro flask or a metal type of water container that you refill from filtered tap water. That's the most eco-friendly and very safe to drink. All right, so on page 402, know what an aqueduct is. So just briefly understand, it's a man-made river. The pipeline next to Saugus High School is an aqueduct. There's water in there, and it takes it to LA City. Some aqueducts are open and not closed in a pipe. And we'll continue with the next video.